Some debts aren't written in ledgers. They're carved into gunfire and into the memory of the one person who walked away. Dry Creek called Elias Ward a gravedigger, but before that he'd been a cavalry scout in the war. Near 60, he wasn't fast anymore, but he was dangerous in a different way. He didn't panic, he didn't talk much, and he was rarely surprised. They didn't know any of that. They saw an old man alone on the cemetery hill with a shovel in his hands, and figured they could make him bow. A cold gun barrel pressed into the center of Elias's back. A voice slid in by his ear, calm as a command. "Don't turn around." Elias didn't. The man behind him chuckled, mistaking stillness for fear. Then he called his men. 7 sets of hoofbeats answered in the dark. 7 riders appeared and spread into a half circle, sealing the hill. The leader stepped around into Elias's sight, a long scar down his cheek and a smile that never reached his eyes. He jerked his chin toward 12 fresh graves. "Dig them up," he said. "All of them." Elias answered with a single word. "No." A hammer clicked back behind him. The leader kept smiling, voice soft as conversation. "If you don't dig, I'll drag this town up here to dig for you. Bare hands." Then he let a frayed red cord dangle in front of Elias's face. The knot was small, neat, and familiar enough to hurt. Elias went still for 1 beat, because only one person had ever tied a knot like that. Mara, the woman who vanished 7 years ago. The leader saw it land and leaned closer, whispering like a sentence being stamped into place. "Now you're going to dig." The cemetery was supposed to be a boundary, a place where the dead stayed put so the living could keep moving. That night it became a stage, and Elias understood the shape of the threat immediately. This wasn't about 12 graves. It was about humiliating Dry Creek until obedience felt natural. If Elias dug, he would defile the dead with his own hands. If he refused, the town would be forced to do it, and shame would spread like sickness. Either way, the hill would teach a lesson. Elias looked at the shovel blade. In the war, a tool became a weapon the moment you ran out of choices. He shifted his grip, not raising it, not threatening, only settling his weight the way he used to before an ambush snapped shut. The leader watched, amused, then pointed at the nearest mound. "Start." Elias stepped forward. His knees complained in the cold. His fingers ached around the handle. But his mind stayed clear, counting angles, listening for impatience, tracking how men positioned themselves when they thought they were safe. The shovel bit into damp soil. He dug until metal struck wood with a dull, final knock. He scraped the last layer away, then pried the lid. The board cracked open. Elias looked inside. No body, no bones. Just a small cloth pouch tied shut with the same red knot. The leader's smile widened, as if this had been the real reason for the visit. Elias loosened the knot and opened the pouch. Inside were 3 things: a folded note, a chipped coin, and a brass button engraved with a tiny bird. The coin made something tighten in his chest. He'd seen it once, years back, in the hand of a man who stood half-turned to every door as if the world was always aiming at him. Calder Voss. A name Dry Creek whispered like a curse and a prayer. Calder had vanished after Alder Wash 7 years ago, the same night Mara vanished. The leader crouched at the grave's edge, watching Elias's face like a man watching a lock give way. "That's not a grave," he said softly. "That's a mailbox." Elias didn't answer. He moved to the second mound. He dug. He struck wood. He pried. Empty again, except for another pouch, another red knot. This one held a crude hand-drawn map of the eastern ridge and a line of ink that felt colder than any gun barrel. "If you want to know where Mara is, bring what you found to Mercer. Hal Mercer, Dry Creek's sheriff. The clean man in a dirty town. The man who made debts into leashes and law into a private business. Elias felt the trap close tighter. The scarred leader stood, satisfied, and waved toward the remaining graves. Keep going. Elias dug the third, the fourth, the fifth. Each coffin was empty, and each pouch carried another fragment, a torn ledger page filled with names and numbers Elias didn't recognize, a broken wax seal stamped with a symbol, a strip of darkened cloth that looked like old blood, a rusted bracelet that had once belonged to someone who'd hoped they could still be seen as human. Every item was tied with the same red knot. By the 11th grave, Elias's arms burned and his breath came thin. By the 12th, his hands felt like they belonged to someone else. He opened the last coffin and found no pouch at all, only a newer red cord tied in the same knot and a spent shell casing with 2 letters scratched into the brass. C.V. Calder Voss. Elias stared at it. Real killers didn't sign their bullets. Someone wanted a story to spread faster than truth. The leader's voice came again, calm and absolute. Take everything to Mercer before sunrise. If you don't, tomorrow you'll dig again. But next time you'll be digging for the living. Then the riders turned and left. 7 horses disappeared into dust. Their hoofbeats faded, but the rhythm stayed in Elias's bones like a warning. He stood among 12 open graves, the cemetery torn apart like a wound. Below him, Dry Creek stayed dark, pretending it couldn't see. Elias gathered the items into a canvas sack, tied it tight, and walked down the hill. The town felt narrower than it should have. Windows were shut, but eyes were awake behind them. The crooked canteen glowed like shelter, but shelter didn't mean safety. Elias stepped inside anyway. The smell of cheap whiskey and stale tobacco hit him. Conversations died in mid-breath. Men looked at the sack and looked away, as if refusing to witness could keep them clean. Eli, the bartender, froze behind the counter, rag limp in his hand. "What happened up there?" he asked, voice barely moving. Elias opened the sack just enough to show the red cord. Eli's face drained. "No," he whispered. "Not that." "Where's Mercer?" Elias asked. Eli flicked his eyes across the street toward the sheriff's office, its lights bright and steady like something that never slept. "In there," Eli said. "Always." Elias's gaze sharpened. "Calder Voss," he said. "Real or just a ghost story?" Eli held his stare. Then he nodded once. "Real," he said. "And if that knot is back, the past is back." Elias left the canteen and crossed the street. 2 deputies stood outside the sheriff's office with hands resting on their holsters like prayers. One sneered when he saw Elias. "Gravedigger," he said. "Lose your way?" Elias didn't blink. "Open the door," he said. "I brought what your sheriff wants." The deputy hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, Hal Mercer sat behind a polished desk in a room too clean for Dry Creek. White shirt, neat hair, ink and paper stacked like he was running a bank, not a town. He looked up and smiled as if Elias were a customer. "Elias Ward," Mercer said. "I hear you do your work clean." Elias set the sack on the desk. Mercer didn't open it right away. He studied Elias first, measuring him the way a man measures a tool before deciding how to use it. Elias didn't sit. He asked the question that had been burning since the red knot hit moonlight. "Where is Mara?" Mercer's smile thinned, but his eyes stayed calm. "Mara," he repeated, savoring the name. "You're asking the right man." Elias opened the sack and laid the items out one by one. The cords, the map, the ledger scraps, the chipped coin, the brass bird button, the casing marked CV. Mercer's gaze moved over them with something close to appetite. His fingers brushed the chipped coin as if confirming its weight. People like to say the past stays buried, Mercer said softly. But dirt never keeps a secret forever. Who did this? Elias asked. Mercer leaned back. Victor Hale, he said. Scar down his face, muscle, not mind. Elias's jaw tightened. Whose mind? Mercer's polite smile returned. A ghost's, he said. Calder Voss. The name fell into the room like a stone. Elias watched Mercer carefully and saw the smallest tightening around the eyes. Mercer wasn't amused. Mercer was alert. That meant Calder was more than a legend. Mercer rose and unlocked a cabinet behind him, pulling out a wooden trunk. Inside were small objects arranged like trophies, rings, scarves, lockets, things that smelled like other people's lives. Mercer lifted a newer red cord with the same knot. You see, he said, this isn't a keepsake. It's a leash. Elias felt his stomach harden. Is Mara alive? Mercer's eyes turned dark and steady. Alive is a church word, he said. Here, people exist. By conditions. He tapped a ledger scrap with one finger. What you dug up is bait, Mercer continued. The real prize is missing. Calder has the missing part, or he knows where it's hidden. And now I'm going to pull him into the open. Elias understood what he had become. Not a messenger, not a victim, a hook. Mercer slid a slip of paper across the desk. Broken Glass Ridge, he said. Tomorrow night, you bring everything there. You stand alone. If Calder wants what you have, he'll come. Elias's throat tightened. And Mara. Mercer smiled like a man offering fair terms. When Calder shows, he said, you'll get your answer. But understand this, Elias Ward. Answers don't always save a man. Sometimes they just tell him what he already lost. Elias took the paper. It felt light, and yet it weighed like stone. He left the office and stepped into the street where the wind felt colder than before. Dry Creek looked the same, but now every light felt like a trap and every shadow felt like a mouth. He returned to his small cabin by the cemetery and set the items on his table. He stared at the red cord and the chipped coin until memory started to sting. He remembered Mara outside the church years ago, quiet, steady-handed, tying that same knot without thinking. He remembered Calder beside her, half turned away, eyes scanning doors and windows as if the world had teeth. Then Alderwash, then disappearance, then Mercer. Elias sat through the night, cleaning his old war rifle, sharpening the shovel blade as if ritual could turn fear into discipline. By morning, the story of the disturbed cemetery crawled through town. People avoided Elias's eyes as if witness made them guilty. Mercer didn't need to threaten anyone. The town threatened itself with silence. Near dusk, Eli found Elias behind the canteen. Don't go to Broken Glass, he said. Men don't come back from that ridge. Elias didn't argue. If I don't go, he said, Mercer drags the town up the hill like Hale promised. He turns every decent person into a grave robber. That's how he wins. Eli swallowed. So what do you do? Elias looked east, toward the black line of hills. I find Calder first, he said. Eli hesitated, then whispered a name. Ruth. Ruth was an old seamstress with hands that shook for reasons she never explained. When Elias showed her the chipped coin, her fingers trembled. That's his, she whispered. Mara said if that coin ever came back to Dry Creek, it meant the past wasn't finished. Elias asked where Calder would hide. Ruth spoke like she was confessing. East Gullies, she said. Old miner's cut. Mara took me once. After Alderwash, I left food there. Then one day, the food stayed untouched. Elias mounted and rode into the East Gullies under stars sharp as nails. The land turned rough, stone and scrub, narrow cuts where sound died quickly. He dismounted near the old mine and approached on foot, moving the way he used to move when a wrong step meant bodies. A small glow flickered from inside the cut, controlled and low. Elias stopped at the mouth and spoke without shouting. "I'm not here to shoot," he said. "I'm here to ask about Mara." Silence stretched long enough to make the night feel heavier. Then a voice came from the dark, low and rough like wind over rock. "If you say that name, you better be ready to pay for it." A figure stepped into the starlight. Broad shoulders, lean from hunger, not weakness, silver in his hair, a face carved by years that refused to soften. But the eyes were steady in a way that made the dark feel watched. Calder Voss. Elias's heart hammered, but he held his ground. He said the truth fast, before courage could sour. "The cemetery was dug up," he said. "Hale brought the red knot. Mercer wants me as bait at Broken Glass Ridge. I want to know if Mara is alive." Calder studied him for a long time, like a man reading a map for lies. "Who are you?" Calder asked. "Elias Ward," Elias said. "The man who buries Dry Creek." Calder's gaze flicked to the shovel on Elias's pack. "Mercer always picks the right man to drag into the mud," he said. Elias offered the sack. Calder opened it, scanning the contents with a soldier's speed. He paused at the casing marked CV and shook his head. "Not mine," he said. "I don't sign bullets. Someone wants a story to spread faster than truth." Elias asked what Mercer wanted. Calder's eyes hardened. "The missing part of the ledger," he said. "The list that ties money men to gunmen. Mercer doesn't fear my draw. Mercer fears what I know." Elias asked why Calder hadn't ended Mercer already. Calder looked toward the distant glow of town lights. "If I kill Mercer in the open," he said, "the men behind Mercer burn Dry Creek to ash. I stayed quiet so the town could breathe. But Mercer dug up graves. That's a declaration." Elias said, "Then help me." Calder didn't pretend it was kindness. "I'm not helping because I'm good," he said. "I'm helping because I owe Mara, and because Mercer just used her not to pull a town by the throat." They planned through the night. Calder spoke in short, sharp lessons. "Don't watch the gun," he told Elias. "Watch the shoulder. Don't listen to shouting. Listen for the silence right before the shot. The most dangerous man is the one who doesn't need to talk." The next night, Broken Glass Ridge glittered under moonlight like a field of shattered knives. Elias arrived alone with the sack. Mercer was already there with deputies and Victor Hale. Hale's scar shone pale under the moon. Mercer looked clean enough to offend the landscape. "Good," Mercer said when Elias approached. "The obedient live longer." Elias set the sack down. "Where is Mara?" he asked. Mercer smiled and signaled. Two deputies dragged a woman from behind a boulder. Her hands were bound. A faint scar ringed her neck like an old cord burn. Gloves covered her hands despite the cold. She was thinner than Elias expected. But her spine was straight, and on her wrist, the red knot sat like a brand. Mara. Elias's stomach dropped, but he didn't move. He remembered Calder's warning. Mercer wanted him to rush and die and prove fear was stronger than hope. Mara lifted her face, and her eyes didn't plead. They slid past Mercer into the darkness as if she knew exactly where to look. Mercer called into the night, voice sharp with ownership. "Calder, come out, or I cut her throat right here." The ridge held its breath. Then one single shot cracked the air. The bullet didn't strike flesh. It sliced the rope binding Mara's wrists clean through. Mara stepped back half a pace the instant the cord fell, like she'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. Mercer spun. Hale drew. Deputies raised barrels. But Calder didn't appear where they aimed. He stood higher, on a slope where moonlight died, a shape made of stillness and intent. Mercer's voice tightened. So the ghost does walk. Calder's voice carried calm and cold. You used her not, he said. You dug up graves. You started a fire you can't control. Mercer laughed sharp. I control this town. I control her. I control you. Calder's gaze flicked to Mara. Mara's gaze met his. No words passed, but something heavier did. Mercer snapped a command and shots cracked toward the slope. Stones sparked. Shards flew. But Calder wasn't there by the second report. He moved before bullets arrived because he'd already read the decision in Mercer's shoulders. Elias flattened behind a rock, rifle tight in his hands, forcing his breath to stay steady. Mara moved in the dark like a blade, cutting angles, never running straight. She grabbed a loose stone and hurled it at Mercer's lantern. Glass shattered. Light died. Darkness swallowed the ridge. In the dark, Calder fired again, not to slaughter, but to dismantle. One shot took a gun hand. A revolver clattered onto stone. Another snapped a rein strap and a horse reared, scattering the deputy's line. Hale charged uphill, furious, desperate to be the man who killed a legend. Broken glass ridge punished him. His boots slid on loose stone, and he lost one beat. Calder needed one beat. A shot cracked. Hale dropped with a scream, his shoulder ruined, alive but no longer a threat. Mercer pivoted and aimed for Mara. He couldn't hit Calder, so he went for the thing he believed would control Calder. Mara saw it coming and lunged straight at him, closing the distance before he could take the clean shot. Elias's chest tightened. He raised his rifle. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of deciding to kill again at 60. Then he remembered the cemetery. He remembered boys in the war. He remembered what hesitation cost. Elias fired. The bullet struck the stone at Mercer's feet, exploding chips into the air. Mercer flinched, his aim twitching just enough. Mara hit him hard, wrenched the gun away, and kicked it into the dark. Mercer staggered, shocked that anyone dared touch him. Calder descended, not sprinting, not reckless, moving like a man walking into the exact place the world required. He leveled his revolver at Mercer. Mercer breathed hard and forced a grin. "You won't shoot me," he rasped. "You shoot me, and the men behind me burn Dry Creek. You shoot me, and you become what you hate." Calder's eyes stayed flat. "I hate a lot of things," he said, "but I hate most the way you think you're law." "Then do it," Mercer snapped. Calder lowered the gun a fraction, and Mercer's grin flickered with triumph. Then Calder stepped in and drove his boot into Mercer's knee. Mercer crashed down onto sharp stone. Calder aimed at Mercer's hand, the hand that held ledgers and signed deaths with ink. "You don't die tonight," Calder said. "You live long enough to watch your power rot." Mercer spat, furious and humiliated. "They're sheep." Calder's voice cut through him. "They just needed to see the wolf bleed." Mara stood beside Mercer, breathing hard. She pulled off one glove and showed bruises beneath the cord. Old marks layered over new. Mercer looked up at her, desperate to make it a bargain. "I kept you alive." Mara's answer was quiet and final. "You didn't keep me alive. You kept me trapped." She lifted her wrist. "This knot isn't yours. It's my reminder. That I would come back, but not as a victim." Calder looked at Elias. "Take the sack back to town," he said. "Give it to Ruth. Give it to Eli. Let Dry Creek see what Mercer really is." Elias nodded, heart pounding, understanding that the fight wasn't ending with Mercer's death. It was ending with Mercer's illusion. Before dawn, Calder and Mara vanished into the dark. Mercer was hauled back toward town by deputies who no longer moved like men who believed. Hale was left groaning on the ridge, alive but broken. Elias rode back to Dry Creek with the sack heavy on his saddle and the truth heavier in his chest. By morning, the town gathered at the crooked canteen like people drawn to a flame they feared. Ruth stood with sewing shears in her hand. Eli set the sack on the bar and opened it for everyone to see. Names, numbers, symbols, not the petty debts of poor men who owed whiskey, but the kind of accounting that turned a town into property. Murmurs rose as faces tightened, as people recognized signatures, stamps, roots, and amounts too large to belong to anyone living in Dry Creek. They weren't just poor. They were being sold. Mercer stepped out around noon, his hand wrapped in white, his face pale. He took 2 steps toward the crowd and prepared to speak, to deny, to threaten. Then he saw their eyes. Not panic, not blind rage, clarity. The town had seen him fall. The town had seen him flinch. The town had read the proof. Mercer stopped. His mouth opened, and nothing came out that could rebuild the old fear. He turned and went back inside his office and shut the door. For the first time, the door closed because he was afraid. That night, Elias returned to the cemetery hill. He filled the graves back in, one by one, pressing the soil down with the flat of his shovel like an apology to the dead. His joints ached. His breath came hard, but each mound restored felt like Dry Creek reclaiming a little dignity. When he finished, he stood at the fence and looked down at town lights flickering behind windows. The town wasn't healed, but it had taken a breath without Mercer's hand around its throat. A soft step sounded behind him. Elias turned. Mara stood at the edge of the hill, gloves gone, scar still faint at her neck, the red cord still on her wrist. Her eyes were clear, alert, alive. "You shoot better than you think," she said. Elias swallowed. "You're alive." Mara nodded once. "Alive isn't a miracle," she said. "It's a cost." "Where's Calder?" Elias asked. Mara glanced east toward the dark gullies. "He doesn't like standing under lamps," she said. "He says bright light makes people forget to watch the dark." Elias looked at the cord on her wrist. "Is it over?" Mara's expression tightened. "Mercer isn't the top of the chain," she said. "The ledger is only a piece. The men who signed it won't let it surface without blood." Elias felt the air turn colder on his skin. "Then what is the cord?" Mara lifted her wrist, letting the knot catch starlight. "A reminder," she said. "Some debts aren't paid with money, and some aren't paid with blood either. Some are paid with the truth, spoken out loud where everyone can hear it." Then she turned and walked back into the dark, disappearing the way she had always moved, quiet, deliberate, leaving only the knot in Elias's mind like a map. Elias stood alone among the graves he'd just restored and understood what Dry Creek had made him now. Not just a gravedigger, a gatekeeper. A man near 60 who had wanted nothing but silence and had been handed the loudest truth in the territory. The past had been pulled out of the ground. The only question left was how many men it would bury before it was finished digging back.